Have you ever taught a grammar concept or rule and then watched your students completely forget it and not use it during a speaking or writing task? I know, it's frustrating. Well, in this episode, we're going to look at why that disconnect happens and how to bridge it by teaching grammar in context. Now, I'm going to share some very manageable, beginner-friendly steps that you can take to make grammar more meaningful, communicative, and effective. And that's without rewriting your entire curriculum. So, let's jump in. Whether you're planning your first lesson or celebrating your 20th year in the language classroom, I understand exactly where you are. I'm Joshua Cabral, and I'm also a language teacher in my 29th year of teaching. Now, I also have the opportunity to support schools and teachers all across the country who are working towards increasing proficiency and building confidence in their students. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast, with over 200 episodes of practical strategies tested in real classrooms just like yours and mine. So let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. I am Joshua Cabral, and thank you, as always, for hanging out with me here on the podcast. I know you're a great teacher. I know you're an effective teacher, and I know that you are a dedicated teacher because you're listening to a podcast about language teaching, and that just shows me you're going the extra step. You are inquisitive, and you're reflective about your teaching, and that just so much respect. I have so much respect for you. So thank you for being here with me each week as we dive into language teaching. So today we're going to talk about everyone's favorite topic that we can never talk about enough. Actually, maybe we can, but we're going to talk about it again. We're going to talk about grammar. Now, this is always a hot topic. No matter where I am, teachers want to talk about it. When I do a workshop that has the word grammar in the topic, people show up. Everybody wants to talk about it. Even if it's the 8:30 a.m. workshop at a conference, teachers want to talk about grammar. They want to understand what's going on with it. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this episode, that we're going to talk about teaching grammar in context. That's another thing that we hear a lot. Now, teaching grammar in context makes sense in theory, but putting it into practice often feels messy. And is there a technique? Is there a process? Is there a definite way to go about it? So maybe you have tried weaving grammar into your communicative tasks, but then students slip back into memorizing rules or asking for charts. Well, so much of this, it gets messy when we talk about this. And this whole idea of even teaching grammar in context, well, you're not alone. Whether or not you have already tried to teach some grammar in a way that you would see as in context and you still have some questions about it, or maybe you're yet to sort of leap into, moving away from teaching the grammar in a way that is, from the charts and the explanations. All of that, we're all coming from different places. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some very practical steps, and they might be first steps for you, that are going to make grammar instruction feel more natural and eventually just more effective. And this is what's going to help our students build accuracy while staying focused on communication. Because what has often happened is we will focus on communication, and then that swung so far in our communicative classrooms that it was understood that that means we don't teach grammar. Or it's we all teach grammar all the time, and then we try to find ways for students to use it, but it doesn't always come out accurately when they're speaking or they're writing. So we swing back and forth in education about what's the right way, what's the wrong way, and what's the most effective way. There's so many different ways to look at grammar. But as we start this discussion, I just want to point out that this isn't a question about whether or not to teach grammar. We're actually going to teach grammar. It's just how we're going to teach it. So this is not a question of yes or no. But grammar that's taught in isolation, that's detached from communication and context and meaning, that's where it just loses its meaning for students and it doesn't really get acquired. So what we're going to do is make sure that we're not teaching grammar in isolation. Here are the verb forms. Here are the measure words. Here's the acronym for when to use the être verbs when you're learning the passé composé. Here is the acronym for when to use por or para or ser or estar in Spanish. There's lots of those things going around. Those are not communicative. Those are teaching grammar in isolation. Because the truth is, when you're speaking and you're trying to decide, should I say soy or estoy or está u es, you're not going through the acronym in your head of, is this origin, is this place, is this time, is this function? That's not how you go about it, and even when you're speaking in French and you're putting something in the past tense and you go, oh my gosh, is this j'ai or je suis? Let's see, it's Dr. V-A-N Vander Tramp. Like, we teach it that way. That's grammar in isolation. But that's not what we're doing when we're speaking in a communicative setting and any proficiency-related setting out in the real world. That's not what we're doing. We're not relying back on those rules. So that's why we want to find opportunities to teach these concepts in a communicative context where they'll actually be used, and that's how they're going to get acquired. So here's this shift that I want to offer you today, a shift in mindset or a new way of thinking about it. And it is that grammar instruction should be anchored in communication and not separate from it. So as long as we are putting grammar in a communicative context, then we're on the right track. And that can look different depending on what's going on in your classroom. But when students learn grammar in a context that is really meaningful input and it has purpose in it, and their output is purposeful as well, it becomes more than just rules. It becomes a tool. This is a tool that they're going to use to understand and to be understood. So you start with this goal of what do you want students to be able to do, and then what's the grammar they need to be able to do that, rather than starting with here's the grammar I need to teach, and then I'll find some ways for them to use it. So essentially, this comes down to, instead of asking, how do I teach this rule? We should start by asking, where does this structure show up naturally? How do learners need to use it to communicate? And sometimes we might say, it's actually not a grammar structure they need to be able to communicate. So why is it in the curriculum? Or at this point, why is it in the curriculum? Is it something that should come later on at a higher proficiency level? So sometimes those are questions that come up because we have our legacy approach sometimes where grammar is taught in level of not use and effectiveness and what's going to make them able to communicate, but grammar is taught in level of complexity. It's present tense, regular present tense, irregular present tense, regular adjectives, irregular adjectives, regular past tense, irregular past tense, which is at level 2. So those are the types of things that we get ingrained in our head sometimes, that grammar is taught in terms of its complexity. Start with the easier, move on to more complex, rather than teaching the grammar that's actually needed for students to communicate within the lesson that you're in. And if you can teach the grammar that's needed for students to achieve those can-do statements in your lesson, then that's how it's going to become acquired, because it's contextualized. And so when they're talking about that, when they're writing about that theme, they'll be able to do it with more ease. So that's the essence of teaching grammar in context, is they are learning grammar because there's a reason that they're learning it. And it's not just because it's the next thing in the curriculum. So let's talk classroom strategies. And I want to keep this simple since we're talking about your first steps in going into this idea of teaching grammar in context. So let's talk about 2 practical ways to start teaching grammar in context, even if you're just getting started. So the 2 strategies are, number 1 is the grammar first pathway, and then number 2 is the text first pathway. Now, they kind of explain in the title what they are, but let's look first at the grammar first pathway. So this is how this framework would flow. So you choose a grammar focus, because this is the grammar first pathway. So you choose a grammar focus. Perhaps it's in your curriculum and you need to teach this. So decide which structure you want students to notice and practice. Notice I said that they should notice it, which means that they are going to pick up on it on their own and then practice it. Maybe this is future tense, adjective agreement, measure words, anything like that. And then ideally, you would select a text that features that grammar structure. So use an authentic or teacher-created resource where the structure appears naturally. It's not about learning that structure. It's about learning about something else, some other content area, but embedded in there is the structure that you want students to acquire, pick up on, and use to communicate about that theme. So the students and the teacher are going to read and engage with that text with the focus first on comprehension. And then you want to highlight the grammar structure that's in the text and have students notice that pattern. So you're going to draw attention to how the structure appears naturally in the text. And then once they've done this, you want to reinforce their use of that pattern through communication. So you want to have them use the grammar in tasks that mirror or extend the text's communicative purpose. Like, what is that topic and theme that's in there? So students still learn the form. Say you wanted them to learn the first person singular endings for a verb. So students will still learn that from the text, but they're using it to describe, interact, and communicate, and not just filling in the blanks. So they're also seeing the structure modeled in a real communicative context. So if you've heard of the PACE model, that's essentially what this is, where you're starting with presentation, where students read a text, and then there's the accentuation, where you point out a particular structure that is repeated so that students can find the pattern. And then C in PACE is to co-construct, where you help students to construct what that pattern is. They could say like, oh, well, all the verbs in the first person end in an E, or all the verbs in the first person end in an O, whatever that might be, whatever pattern they're trying to find. Then the E is extension in PACE, and that is where the students are going to use that structure on their own. So it's presentation, accentuation, co-construction, and then extension. So with this idea, you are starting with a grammar structure, a grammar point, or a topic, and this usually happens because it's coming up in your curriculum and you need to teach it. And so you want to find a text that has that embedded in there many times, or at least several times, so that students can find that pattern. Now, finding an authentic text on that very specific grammar point might be challenging, so it might be something you want to create on your own as a teacher, or you can also leverage AI tools and ask something like to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini to create a text that has that grammar structure that you're looking for and tell it what level that you are teaching. Now, the second strategy is the text first pathway. So this would be more beneficial for higher levels of proficiency, and also if you have a little more leeway within your curriculum and you don't have to teach grammar structures in a particular order. So this pathway flips the order of starting with grammar. So you're going to start with meaningful input and let the grammar emerge from it. So you start with a reading, a listening, or a video that has a really rich communicative value to it. It's a topic that you can engage with students that they'll be interested in. And then identify the essential grammar that is needed in there for students to understand and pull that out. Highlight the structures that are crucial for making sense of the text. Maybe it's in the past tense, or there are comparisons, there are descriptions, whatever that is. So again, this is if you have some leeway in how you go about your curriculum, where you can choose what is necessary to focus on. It's almost like looking at pop-up grammar. And then have students go through that same process with the PACE model that we just talked about, where you are going to highlight the grammar that you want them to focus on, find the patterns, draw attention, and then have them do something with it. The exact same process as we did. The main difference between these approaches is with the first strategy, you start with the grammar and you have to find a text that has it, or create one, or have AI create one. Or with the second approach, you start with a text and then you can find the grammar in there that's necessary for students to be able to communicate on that topic. So in both cases, students are still learning these forms within the language, but they're using it in real communication and not just filling in blanks. In the end, yes, they'll be able to tell you what the adjective forms are. Yes, they'll be able to tell you what the endings of the first person singular are, or all of the verb endings. But they're done in a way that's communicative, that they're seeing it in context, and they're able to figure those patterns out on their own. And that's where it's been found that students are able to retain and acquire the structures, is when they are able to identify what they are and construct that meaning of them on their own. But you're doing it all communicatively, where you're talking about the topic of the text the whole time and how it's used within the text, rather than just saying that these are the verb endings, these are the adjective forms, these are the prepositions. So if you're thinking about this and it's swirling around in your head and you say, yes, this sounds great, I really want to try this out, but maybe you need a little bit of help in figuring out how to actually plan this out with maybe a template, well, I can help you out with that. So that's exactly why I created one of my quick win PD courses for teachers, which is called First Steps in Teaching Grammar in Context. So in these quick win PD courses, you will learn in just 30 minutes what it actually means to teach grammar in context, how to choose between grammar first or a text first approach, and then how to align your grammar input and communicative tasks, and then how to use a simple planning template to make it all manageable for you. So in these quick win courses, you get an audio walkthrough so you can listen anywhere, detailed notes and everything you need to understand all of this, along with a planning template that you can use again and again. There are reflection activities and examples at multiple proficiency levels, so you could use them right away in your classroom, or they can be used to spark an idea for what you can do. And you can also get a personalized certificate of completion when you finish, so you can have that for your PD clock hours. So the link for this course is in the show notes, or you can get it at wlclassroom.com/grammar in context. So wlclassroom.com/grammar in context, and you can start working on this PD course, First Steps in Teaching Grammar in Context, right away. So here's your challenge for the week. I want you to take just one grammar concept from an upcoming unit, just one, and ask yourself, where does this show up naturally and in context somewhere? Or how can I connect it to a reading, a task, or a real communication need? And then choose your entry point. Are you going to do grammar first or text first, and then try it out? It doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be intentional. So you're not just teaching the verb forms because it's in the curriculum, but you are intentionally choosing a text that has that in there. Or you're starting with a text and you're intentionally just focusing on the grammar that's needed for students to have a more robust and deeper understanding of that text. So just remember that this isn't about throwing out your curriculum or ditching structures altogether. It's about making the grammar you're already teaching really stick and get acquired by students, because it's grounded in meaning and connected to what students actually want to do with language. So if you'd like some more support on planning that kind of lesson, the mini course is there for you. It's short, it's practical, and I designed them to help you make small shifts that lead to really big results, quick wins even, for you and your students. So the link is in the show notes to get the course, or you can get it at wlclassroom.com/grammar in context. So thank you for all you do on a daily basis to support and motivate your students. I very much appreciate the opportunity to support you and your language teacher colleagues as you bring effective, proficiency-focused strategies into your classroom. And a reminder that I provide on-site workshops. We can also do them virtually. And I have self-paced departmental PD that you can do on your own that I guide you through. And of course, my new Ready for Tomorrow Quick Win PD courses for individual teachers just like you, including this one about teaching grammar in context. You'll find all the links in the show notes or on my website, wlclassroom.com. I will talk to you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And let's stay connected on social media. You can find me at WL Classroom pretty much everywhere. You'll also find lots of ideas, suggestions, and resources on my website, WLClassroom.com. Now stay curious, keep learning, and continue the great work you do inspiring and supporting your students.